Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT patch rundown video. Today we'll be diving into the final patch of Set 5, 1121. This is it folks, the end of the set is here. Unfortunately, the last patch is a bit lacking as the bulk of the fun changes were done in 1120. Think of 1121 as an extension of that patch as there's only a handful of balance adjustments. Stay tuned for the section after the patch notes as we'll be doing a brief review of how the balance patches throughout Set 5 went. With all that said, let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. As all of the fun system changes were in the previous patch, we can skip right to the trait changes for patch 1121. Surprisingly, the largest trait change of this patch is to Mystics. As the patch notes mention, they have seen a trend of players focusing less on the higher tier of Mystic. The goal here by buffing 4 and 5 Mystic is it should incentivize players to add in more of them. We'll briefly talk about why this is a flawed assessment of the meta, but first let's show the numbers being altered. The first two tiers are unchanged, but tiers 3 and 4 are going from 150-250 bonus magic resist to 175-300. Relatively large changes for 5 Mystic and a moderate adjustment for 4. Overall, yes, it is good for the higher tiers of Mystic to be more worthwhile. The problem is that, at least in the mid-set, magic damage has never truly been that dominant in the meta. Most of the time, there are multiple AD compositions that end up near the top of the meta, with 1 and sometimes 2 AP boards that do well. What that means is there hasn't been any reason to commit to 4 or 5 Mystics, regardless of the numbers. Mystic has generally stayed the course of being a splash trait. That said, we can't harp on this buff too much, though they likely could have balanced other synergies that are more relevant to the meta. Next are a few smaller trait adjustments like a minor nerf to Abomination. Even at the end of the set, it seems Abomination can't escape being in the patch notes. The change this time is a tweak to the health and attack damage scaling of the monstrosity in each stage, going from 16% to 13%. Honestly, this isn't much of a change, but anyone running Abomination may notice the Abomination scaling slightly worse in the mid and late game. Continuing on, the next trait change is the smallest of the nerfs to Legionnaire. We're not exaggerating about how small this change is, it was almost barely noticeable on the patch notes. Only 4 Legionnaire were affected by this nerf, which lowered the attack speed bonus from 75% down to a whopping 70%. That's it. Okay, snarky comments aside, it is an odd balance change for them to make on the final patch of Set 5. You'd think they'd do a bit more? Sure, 1120 was the true big patch for the end of the set, but these minor adjustments are, so far, quite lackluster. Truth is, this nerf probably won't matter at all in the game. Legionnaire will continue to be about the same as they were before, so don't fret this 5% nerf if you're a Legionnaire one-trick. And the final trait change is to Sentinel. This is where we'd love to applaud them for nerfing Sentinel, a synergy that has, over the course of the mid-set, been one of the best, if not the best traits. And in the last few metas, it has not only been one of the strongest compositions, it's also been one of the simplest to play because it's a vertical trait. Unfortunately, this change is a buff. On the plus side, it's a buff to 9 Sentinel, which is a chase trait very few players will ever obtain in a game. In the very least, this is an interesting change for the last patch of the set. It gives players a reason to aim for 9 Sentinels as the attack speed bonus is going up to 600% from 500%, which is quite the increase. So we wish all of you good luck if you have any plans for trying to hit 9 Sentinel. That does it for traits. Let's now switch on over to the final batch of champion changes for the mid-set. Up first for the final round of champion adjustments is Poppy. Poppy has cruised along in Set 5 as an okay early game champion that players happen to 3-star on occasion when playing Hellion Reroll. Suffice it to say, Poppy hasn't been all that great. But it all changes now as they're buffing her abilities damage to 450 at level 3, up from 400. Okay, no, a 50 damage increase is unlikely to thrust Poppy into the meta spotlight, but it does at least make her more worthwhile to 3-star for anyone still playing Hellion Reroll. Unfortunately, the Candyland composition of bygone sets is unlikely to make a return at the end of Set 5. Moving along, the next champion is Syndra. Much like Poppy, this adjustment is just a 50 damage increase to her ability at tier 3. Nothing to write home about, though it does add a bit of incentive to any players looking to play Reroll Redeemed with Varus Carry. It's a nice buff, but it's about as relevant, if not less relevant, than the Poppy change. Up next is Misfortune. We want to preface this by pointing out that they put this change under the, quote, large section of the patch notes. That means it's meant to be more of a meta-defining change than the previous two champions we've covered. But all they've done is lowered the damage of Miss Fortune's ability to 550 from 600 at level 3. That's it, and quite honestly, not really that large of a change. The relevancy of this nerf has to do with Miss Fortune Hecarim composition that used to do well in the meta. But it's been quite a while since that comp has been truly relevant, generally skirting around the edges of the meta. All this nerf does is make that composition even less likely to be played, which is unfortunate because the final patch of Set 5 should be all about promoting diversity amongst meta builds. On a more positive note, if you liked Miss Fortune in Set 5, you'll be happy to know she's returning in Set 6. Another champion listed under the large champion changes is Zyra. But again, it's just a 50 damage nerf, going from 575 damage at level 3 to 525 for her ability. Maybe if it was double that, it would be relevant, but even then, probably not, because Zyra isn't all that essential for either Spellweaver or Draconic. Draconic is quite popular in the meta, but currently players generally either lean into Ashe carry or hold out and wait for Heimerdinger. Zyra 3 is certainly playable, but it's not ideal, so all this nerf does is make it even less likely that we'll ever see level 3 Zyras running around. That said, it's at least an understandable change because Draconic is so prevalent in the meta, whereas Miss Fortune 3 was definitely not. Let's shift over to 4-cost champions, beginning with Lucian. Sentinels, as we mentioned earlier, are doing quite well in the meta. A large part of that is due to Lucian, particularly Lucian 1, because he's one of the few 4-cost carries that can stabilize a board even as a 1-star unit. The mixture of dealing good damage, having a strong frontline thanks to Galio, and Sentinel being one of the best vertical traits. So why are they buffing Lucian? They're increasing his attack damage from 70 to 75, and while we love to meme on the 5 attack damage buffs that are oh so common, this buff is actually meaningful. It's not game-breaking, but more AD makes Lucian 1 even stronger than he already is. Luckily, it is only a 5 damage buff, so it's not going to ruin the meta, but still, it's a weird buff to see where there's plenty of other 4-cost champions that they could have looked at over Lucian. Up next is Vel'Koz with some okay number adjustments. They're altering his damage to 850 1100 from 900 1150. While the number differences aren't that high, keep in mind that Vel'Koz does damage over the course of his cast, so a lower or higher max damage is quite meaningful. We'll be honest by saying that a nerf to Vel'Koz 1 is a bit odd considering he isn't all that strong as a 1-star unit. The 2-star nerf is good since the Laser Squid does his job a bit too well at destroying boards with proper positioning. If they had either buffed or left Vel'Koz's damage alone at tier 1, then this would be the best change of the patch. As it stands, it's just alright. It mostly just makes hitting Vel'Koz 2 even more important. And finally, we have 5-cost champion adjustments. There's quite a few, so let's start with the smaller changes, with the first being Gwen 3. All the text says is that Gwen 3 will now snip a larger area. There's no actual numbers here, so if you want to find out exactly how large of an area Gwen will snip, well, we wish you luck in hitting a Gwen 3. The other minor change is to Heimerdinger, and it's an alright buff as the tier 1 damage of his ability goes from 400 to 425. Even though this is listed as a small change, it's actually quite impactful. An issue Heimerdinger had for quite a while is at level 1, he kinda sucks. Now a 25 damage increase won't make a massive difference, but at least it is a buff, meaning anyone that hits an early Heimerdinger can definitely pivot into playing him instead of waiting for Heimer 2. All in all, good change. Now for the larger changes, starting with Akshan. Akshan is one of the hardest carries in the game to kill because his ability causes him to become untargetable. What would end up happening is Akshan would cast, get into the enemy backline, take and deal a bunch of damage, then peace out and heal while swinging around. That would be fine, except there's no real counterplay at all. So they're lowering his health to 800 from 850, so Akshan has at least some risk of dying when diving into the enemy backline. He's still plenty strong though, just don't expect Akshan to survive every time he swings boldly into the backline. And the final balance change of Set 5 is to, of course, Kayle. Kayle has struggled in Set 5, never truly finding her stride in the game as the Ascension mechanic just didn't quite hit the mark. In this, the final hour of the set, they're buffing the 3rd form and final form of Kayle's Ascension. The 3rd form, which is immunity for a certain number of attacks, is going from every 15th attack to every 12th. That's a huge change considering Rage Blade scaling means 12 attacks can happen quite fast the longer the fight goes on. Kayle's final form is gaining additional damage, going from 8125 to 9150. Overall, these are decent buffs to Kayle, but gosh, does it feel too late. At least players that want to run Kayle will have at least one patch to play her, and maybe, just maybe, she'll be relevant in the meta. Alright, that's it for the final patch of Set 5, 1121. But before we go, we want to quickly talk about the overall state of patches for Set 5. All throughout the final 2 weeks of Set 5, we'll be taking a look at the larger picture of Set 5, ranging from top champions to traits to the metas that came and went. For today, we want to focus on the patch balance. In Set 4, balance was all over the place, often leaving entire metas where certain champions or compositions went untouched for quite a while. Does anyone remember War Week? Because of how good the cadence of balance patches went in Set 4, the goal they had in Set 5 was to be quicker on the draw to deal with any problematic balance issues. And overall, they did a fantastic job at this. There have been tons of B patches and hot fixes through both halves of Set 5, making it one of the most balanced sets that we've ever had from the sheer amount of patches there were. Whether or not the frequency of changes ended up being positive for the meta isn't really the focus here, more so that they delivered on the promise of addressing problems in the meta. Of course, the balance wasn't perfect, especially when there were inherent flaws to the design of the set, such as too many vertical synergies or certain champions being impossible to balance effectively. But at the end of the day, the balance team did their best, and it showed, so hats off to them for working so hard at balancing the game. And that's all for today, folks. Overall, the final patch of Set 5 isn't really 1121, it was more so 1120. As we said in the intro, look at this as the B patch, as the amount of changes are quite small, with not too many relevant adjustments. That said, it should be a fun meta for anyone still looking to climb as they wait for Set 6. Let us know in the comment section below which patch of Set 5 was your favorite. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for your Giant Slayer TFT videos.